Okay, so I'm just going to do, I suggest everyone does speaker view because then Athena will come up and then the screen will come up. But I just want to say a huge thank you to the lovely Athena Thompson, who runs a business or co-runs a business with her husband called Tech Lever. She is an absolute, well, let me just start with, I friggin' love her because when I first started She's the Boss, Athena was there on hand from day one, seeing what she could do to help. She has helped so many other amazing women. She is totally across government and all that kind of language that you need and how to access grants and things. And I asked her very last minute when someone dropped out if she would do this. And I think this is going to be an incredible presentation. I've seen what she's going to go through. So, Athena, I'm going to hand it over to you and let me know if you need me to do anything else.
Excellent. So I'm just going to share my screen with everyone.
Sure. Well, just introduce yourself first. Tell people a little bit more about Tech Lever and what you do, because I don't think I did the best intro.
So primarily we help people with the R&D tax program. So that's an Australian government program where you can claim money for research and development through the Australian government. It's a non-competitive program. My background is in commercialisation, and so I see grants as a means to an end to getting your product to market or just growing your business or scaling your business. And so when I look at grants, I think about how they can provide additional value, but it's just one method of looking at funding to complement what you're doing. Yeah. So, and I've worked in that kind of industry for the last 10 or so years. My first job out from uni was in nuclear medicine, but I liked business so much and problem solving so much, I pivoted away and worked within the research sector with the likes of the Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organisation and University of New South Wales, commercialising their intellectual property, and started my own business with a co-founder called GemMaker and ran that for about 5 years and took quite an innovative business model pre-COVID times, which was really working on flexible working conditions. We had a team of about 15 people and we set it up so that you could work anywhere, anytime, any place.
Wow, how innovative.
And then everyone started doing it, which is great, which is really what you want to see. People moving with the times and being flexible around that, especially for women. Really important to have that flexibility. So that's a little bit about me. In terms of really trying to hone or get the most out of today, I'm going to pop a few questions for you. I'm going to share my screen. So just give me 1 second.
Sure.
So we'll see how we go with timing. Chime in if you've got a question along the way. So we'll talk about around the philosophy and goal setting and how that aligns to your business, how to go about funding, looking at eligibility and different types of grant structures and the process, and the record keeping you have to do alongside of that once you've got it. How do you make your submission really count? What do you do post-submission? And I can talk a little bit about online forms. So I'm just about to launch a poll because a lot of where you look and how do you decide what to do, I guess, is kind of based on 3 different key things. So you'll see the polls pop up now.
Yep, they're there.
So I'd like to know, have you applied for a grant before? Did you have any success?
Do you want us to do that now?
Yeah, that'd be great.
It won't let me click on it. That's weird. Oh, is everyone else able to click it?
Yeah.
Oh, maybe because it must be because I'm part of it. I set it up, I think.
Excellent. All right. Oh, so we've got 3/4 of us are in Victoria. So in terms of looking at grant, a few people are like, I need funding. But I'm like, well, what do you need it for? And so whilst there's lots of different opportunities that come up from time to time, you really want those opportunities to align with where you're heading to with your business. And so I always start with like, what's your goal? What are you looking for the longer term? And within that, how have you decided to move that forward towards that goal? What kind of projects might fit underneath that? What kind of resources would you need to allocate to that? What's your current cash flow look like to support that? And what do you need if you wanted to accelerate that project? And so the importance of really thinking about what's important to your business and where you want it to be is that this, rather than taking like the funding, like thinking about what your needs are, means that you're going to find grants that better align with your needs, and therefore you're going to find it easier to write those applications, to speak to them, that when it comes to doing the actual project, you're getting the most out of it to push your business further. So I really like to think about what those are. Okay, we've got a lovely handful of people that have had success. That's great to see.
Only in a very minor way in my case.
But nonetheless, it's a success. So when I've come across a few people that have said, oh, I've paid for this access to a platform to use to tell me all the grants, but I recognise that I probably only use one grant in a year. And so those platforms are useful to identify the lots of different sources, but it really depends on that model. So I can see everyone here's a PTY Ltd. Is anyone a not-for-profit or a charity?
Greatest Good's a social enterprise.
A social enterprise? Okay.
Right. For not making a profit, but a for-profit social enterprise. And we also have a grants directory with over 60 filters. So people, charities and not-for-profits and social enterprises can find grants in seconds rather than trawling through all those databases you've got that aren't very user-friendly.
Oh, that's great, Jenny. Maybe you can put that into the chat so that we can see where that is, because I'm sure Athena can add that to her list.
Yeah. You need to be a member, but yeah, I can put it in there.
Okay, great.
Excellent. And so that's what happens with these platforms. Some of them are a bit clunky. To utilise the full functionality, you do need to have like a license or a membership to it. Some of these platforms try to sell themselves to other entities that then become the interface, and Grant Guru is like one of those. So at the end of this session, I've got a list of the places that you go for those actual sources, where they're pulling that information from as well.
Can you tell us a little bit more about these ones though? So Grant Guru's that is that big one that you go to that's got a whole lot of government grants and things on it, isn't it?
Yeah, it does, but they all do. And so generally they'll have the heading, the title of the program, the date that it's due, whether it's open or shut. Sometimes they'll have everything that's on there that's been in there in the past. And so you can get a lot of information, but sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming with it. And some of these are more positioned for not-for-profits or charities rather than a for-profit organisation with their listings. And so it's not until you've opened up, like you've clicked on a link and then you've opened up the next layer and then you've gone to the actual funder to get their information to say, oh, hang on, I don't have the right business structure. I'm a for-profit. I'm not a registered charity. I don't have BGR status.
So for those of us that have a proprietary limited, which ones of those should we go to? Grant Guru, Victorian Chamber, and our community group?
Oh, I would say put that to a side unless you are. Yeah. But it's good to be aware of them, that there are these platforms that people pay to, and some organisations may pay some of these entities to advertise on there as well for their specific grants. So I'm going to give you a list based on where you are for your state to be able to look up the specific grants. But at the federal level, it's all in one spot. and that's underneath grants.gov.au. Grants Connect, it's called. And so they'll list every grant that's out there that's under each of the departments. And what you'll note is that as a new government comes in and they've got new budget initiatives, some programs fold and some programs open. You'll have programs that may be an annual or based on a number of rounds, like that Women in Entrepreneurship. They had 2 to 3 rounds that they'd go through, whereas their previous program around commercialisation, accelerating commercialisation, that was open all the time, and they instituted rounds, like you put in your submission and then they'd go and review. So it wasn't on a round basis. And so that changes depending on the department that you're dealing with. And so when you're looking at that federal level and looking at what you do, the way to look at it and to look for what you want is thinking about the industry that you're in as well. So, for example, I think it was, you mentioned someone was in publishing.
Yep.
Then be looking at things like publishing or that fit alongside of that, or some keywords like maybe journalism or things that are around that. Or go specifically to the department where your industry would fit under. So, for example, if you're in tourism, that you'd go to that department. The other one to think about, is anyone regional? Within regional Australia?
No, I don't think in this group. We've got someone from South Australia that's just.
I'm based regionally, Athena.
Oh, and Chantel.
Hi,
Yeah.
I'm based in regional Vic, and I'm on the border of New South Wales and South Australia. So sometimes I do cross collaboration, so I can apply for New South Wales and South Australian stuff as well.
Oh, excellent. And so I guess that gives you the opportunity to also look at grants that are specifically for regional. And within the states, usually there is a department that deals with regional areas. There is in Victoria and South Australia and the like, as well as being at that federal level as well. And so while you can go to these websites, like within the government websites for each specific state, and I've only listed Victoria's up here at the moment, but the list I'll give you at the end of today will list out where you can find it for general grants underneath every department, but also those ones specific to business or small business.
Right.
But I wouldn't leave it to just looking at the web. That's a starting point to then call the department that's relevant to start a conversation. And to be able to have that conversation, you really need to know what you're trying to do. So it really helps to sit down and get a good understanding of what you're trying to tackle, so that when you have those conversations, that whilst you might have what's on the website as currently available or coming soon, they may be able to give you some insight that what might be in the pipeline. So you do that relationship development.
Because I always thought with government it's better to just do it all online, but you say pick up the phone and start to build some relationships.
Yeah, and I guess the thing is that once a grant is online, it becomes a competitive process. And so what they tell you needs to be consistent with everybody else to not show a bias towards anyone else. But in terms of understanding what their goals are and what they're trying to put forward, it allows you to see where those two things line up. Like, is what you're trying to do help them reach what their goals and aims are? And that even drills down to like that, a local council level too. So with local councils, they typically would divide it up into 3 areas, I guess. You look at community-based, which is normally tiered for that non-for-profit ground roots organisation type stuff. And then you've got that business, which usually within a council and their mandate to help increase, to develop the economy for the local area, they'll support traders groups. And so usually it might be funding a pocket to there, as well as retailers. But they do, it really does vary depending on what that council is really aiming in terms of their objectives. And so again, it's worthwhile just picking up the phone to speak to someone in the economic department. in terms of the tiers of funding, federal and state is where you probably get the most amount. When you start looking at local council, you're looking 20K and less. And so if you're looking at a community organisation, it might be 10K.
Right.
Whereas at state, you start looking at, 100K and up, really depending on the area that you're working towards. And also the length of that project too. So, the timing, it all kind of marries up.
Can I just ask, out of the ratio of funding, how often is the funding more geared towards project-based funding as opposed to capacity and capability sort of development funding, or like the back end of operations funding? Like, what's the ratio that you see in terms of what's available?
Oh, it depends on the department that you're dealing with and what they're trying to do. So, for example, if you look at the Department of Jobs and Skills, then that's about skilling people up and capability. Or like you look at those regional grants and they tend to be around either infrastructure or skilling people up. When, for example, manufacturing grants come up, it's about skilling up with equipment as well as people as well. So quite often you're looking at, well, how can I increase the number of jobs coming into that local economy? How am I increasing the skills or availability that might not have previously been there as well? And they usually want to see it align up to a business plan if that's the case.
Okay.
So it does come down to the specific sector that you're working in that industry, about what their needs are. So yeah.
Can I just add in, there's also a plethora, Chantal, there's a plethora of stuff around at the moment helping individual, particularly female, Indigenous founders as well as organisations. There's a lot going on in that space at the moment.
Yeah.
Jenny, would you be open to a side yarn about that?
Sure.
Perfect, thank you.
Sorry, Athena, just thought I'd mention it.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing to look at is not necessarily, I guess, grants, is when you start looking at wage subsidies. Some of the state governments do as well. So I think there was some.
I think most of us are one-woman bands running some kind of service where we're offering to upskill people. Other than Jenny, who obviously has her job board.
Yeah.
Job board, sorry, her directory, which should be, of course, being supported by government. But that's good about female founders anyway. Yeah,
and so going back to the federal state government, they've closed some of their programs, and they've got one in the pipeline at the moment underneath that National Construction Fund, so that startups that would have previously accessed that, I guess they've just finished a period of consultation to look at what programs they're going to put on the table, and so they work towards the priority areas of government. So like I think they've got 5 areas, like from cyber to agri to medical, and what fits within that to help businesses roll that out. The catch with some of these, I'm going to just flick through to then the last area to think about is looking at corporates and foundations. So I guess with businesses looking to meet the sustainable development goals and show their corporate social responsibility, they do give out funding too. But again, it's usually tiered towards not-for-profits and charities rather than for-profit organisations. So the thing to think about here is, I guess, in terms of your project, who are you helping? And if you're helping someone or a cohort of people that fits with a not-for-profit, that's a good opportunity to look at a collaboration in terms of how can you support a not-for-profit to get grant funding to then utilise your service, which is a different way to think about it in terms of what's there. And that also goes down to other grants. I'll talk about that in just a second. So in that list, I've given a whole bunch of places that you can look at for that as well.
Yeah.
Then also there's things on the international level from time to time, but again, there are smaller pockets of funding as well.
Okay.
So I've just popped up here a bunch of information to think about when you're looking at your eligibility for those specific grants. So you typically they'll want to know where you're located, what industry you're in, and I guess for a lot of these grants that and I know that there was an issue for people at a point in time around the structure of your business. If you're a sole trader, that you wouldn't be necessarily able to apply for a lot of these grants. And then also just looking at the target market. So just kind of do this little bit of a brief just to get a sense of like who and what, so that then that becomes the basis for some of the keywords when you're starting to search on those different websites as well. Like,
Yeah.
oh, this is what I'm doing and this is where I'm at. And then picking up the guidelines to then have a further look. So with all grants, they follow a really similar format with your eligibility. So the grant will have their guidelines, and it's usually in a separate PDF document, and sometimes it might be listed on the website. So it's not until you start to drill into it that you get a good sense of whether it's a good fit. And so it's around the structure, it's also around the project. So going back to that first thing I said about, well, what's your business trying to do? How could you think of things in terms of projects that you want to roll out? With some of those projects that you have in mind, when it comes down to the guidelines, they may have things that are eligible and things that are not. They'll also have the amounts of money that you can put in for a project, and whether there's any requirement to match the funding as well. And that matching could be cash, it could be in kind, it could be a mixture of both. And when they do have that requirement to match the funding, or if they suggest that it's a nice thing to have, I would say it's the best thing to have, because if they're trying to compare it against like being a competitive process, comparing it against an organisation that says, look, I'm putting a bit of me into it, I'm taking the risk alongside of you, they're going to look more favourably at that application than one that's not.
Athena, do you have to have a lump sum? So if you're asking for 100 grand over a year, and they say, what are you going to put in? Could it be your earnings over that year would be enough to be a co-contribution? Yeah,
and it depends. Depends on the grant, and if the guidelines don't specify, you can have a conversation with the funder around that. But it can be based on cash flow, maybe throughout the year. So, for example, if you were getting a grant to run an event, it might also be it might be income as a result of running that event that would be shown to be as the cash contribution for that.
Right.
But yeah, it might be cash flow that you're looking at with doing what you're doing, or as a result of that activity. Yeah, so it does depend. And then if you do win the grant, they will stipulate that when that income or that in-kind contribution has to be recognised. And I've seen some structures where the money is paid into the project and then it gets paid back out to the organisations, but usually that's not a common thing.
Okay.
And then that funding that you receive is usually tied to a milestone.
Yeah.
But with the smaller grants, smaller pockets of money, it might just be the end point. So if you were getting a $1,000 grant, that usually you wouldn't say, like, I've done the work, it's done, right? Or if it's to purchase something, like I purchased the thing, I purchased the car or purchased the piece of equipment. But as you start ramping up the amount of money, they will give you certain amounts based on what you've completed.
Right.
So I guess it's when you start to break down that project, in terms of saying, oh, well, I said I would deliver a plan, and then I needed to go and, if we was just say manufacturing, like buy my piece of equipment and then install it and then train the people on it and So each of those things would be like milestones along on the way. And so, you know, you look at your overall project and then think about how you break it down and when you need that money by to support those resources going through.
Gotcha.
And so that comes to then, I guess, you have a project plan that supports that funding. So that's, I guess, becomes another element. And depending on who the funder is, they may have their form online, specified to a template of how they want that information. So like what's the aim of what you're trying to do? What's your milestones for that? And then a separate component to that being the budget. And so the budgets typically like would all have things that are eligible and things that are not. So you end up having a total project, money that's eligible within that project and money that's not eligible. And I guess like that's where you as your own business would have to subsidize that. And then you also break it up in terms of the cash contribution that you're able to put towards that or the in-kind contribution for it as well.
Gotcha.
Then the other aspect on the grant is that they'll have a merit criteria. So because they're giving you funding because they've got objectives that they want to meet. And so the grant funding is there to help them meet their objectives. So I guess it's trying to see that that what you're trying to do, your solution or the problem that you're trying to tackle is helping them reach their targets as well.
Yeah.
And so that means having a really good understanding of what that problem is that you're trying to manage or trying to move forward with. Then the other part, I guess, is proving that you have the capability to deliver on that as well. Showing some experience of what you've done in the past. There's no different to marketing yourself to your potential customers or clients. So you talk about the experience that you've got and how your experience is relevant to what their needs are, and the stronger that you are with that capability means that it's going to be a less riskier project for them to then grant you that funding. So it's good to be able to show that experience.
Can I ask a question before we move on?
Yep.
Is that okay? Will they be open to a conversation about the merit criteria to enable you to kind of change it a bit? Like, are they open to that kind of conversation where you say, hey, this is roughly my idea. Is that going to be enough, or do I need to tweak it in this direction to meet the merit criteria? Are they willing to have those kind of conversations?
It depends on where you're going with it. So I've noticed that the State Department with like Creative Vic and Screen Vic, they'll have those development conversations with you to make sure you target your project quite right. Sustainability Vic are similar in that way too. Like they'll sit and have that conversation with you as well to point out, oh, well, you know, maybe you haven't considered that. And that's why it's worthwhile to give them a call to see if you can have that conversation at the get-go, especially where it's not kind of clear in the guidelines where you're trying to read behind the lines as well.
Okay, cool. But it's not going to put them off in terms of them thinking you're just trying to make stuff up to get money.
No.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and so that's, I guess it's, you start with, I've got this idea and this is how I see it aligns, but I'm not sure on this. And they should be able to talk to that too, to develop, to then, you know, I guess then it's to refine the project so that it is the case as well. Yeah.
Yep.
And so to have that conversation earlier is best as well. So when you see a program opening, it's worthwhile to have that conversation then. Because I guess then usually like a grant might be open for like maybe four weeks and then they'll close. So you don't want to be leaving that conversation for the last week in terms of having to, I guess is when you start to change it a little bit to what your scope, then that's reflected in your costs and the resources that are required to do it as well. And they'll tell you what would be eligible and what's not.
Yep.
Yeah. Then I guess the other part that around that is that if you're going to do this project, what kind of impact is it going to have? And so I think there was that question earlier around, well,
Yes.
what difference am I going to make to this specific problem? Like, this is the problem, but with this amount of money, we're going to be able to make this much of a difference in someone else's life, or be able to change, to look at it. And I kind of think it about like a return on investment, you know. If I do this, this is how much I'll get back. And when you're looking at like that community type focus, it might mean like the impact being like the number of people that you're reaching, or how that like what they didn't have before to what they will have now as a result of doing that. And then I guess there's the part in terms of, well, what's the evidence to show that as well. The other types of templates that you might come across in terms of the grant, and again, it depends on the size of funding that you're asking for. So where you might have a project plan and a budget, if the funding goes above a certain amount, they may require like a risk matrix. So you're saying you're going to be able to deliver on a particular milestone, but have you considered all the issues that you might come across? And is it a real problem? And what might you do to mitigate that potential problem from occurring? The other part is letters of support, and they do make a difference in terms of that. It's showing commitment by either if you've got a project where you've got partners or collaborators for it, you'll need that letter of support. But it might be also for the entities that you're trying to build something for, your customers or your clients, to show that actually there is a real need, and this letter of support shows that there is a need for it. It's almost like having another way to have, it's showing that you want to do a commitment, but also it's another way to have like a secondary reference to say, oh, you know, I believe in what this organisation is doing and the like. Where you've got a collaborator that's coming on board as part of your project with that letter of support, you do want to cover off a few things that might be in that merit criteria, like in terms of their capability and what they'll be delivering on as well. Sometimes, depending on the project, again, they might ask for a business plan as well. Yep. And so that's, I guess, for a few people, do you have a business plan? It's in my head, but that's
going to be important.
Yeah, it'll be important for that. And I guess if we go back to the very start, if you know where you want to be, where you want to end up, you know what your goals are, it's actually just putting pen to paper and recording it. So a lot of this stuff you should already have in your business, whether it's in your marketing, on your website, in your portfolio of like your testimonials, or your business plan, or your manuals. It should all be kind of sitting there. It's just a matter of pulling it together and popping it in the one spot for them. So additional documentation along the way. They may require that you include quotes where you're requiring other people's services, that you can have evidence of your insurance, whether it's public indemnity or professional indemnity.
And they tend to tell you what they want in that anyway, don't they? Because I know the council made me take out 20 million public liability, which sounds like a lot, but it's $35 a month, just in case anyone's freaking out about it.
Yeah. And I guess there are organisations where they can be the applicant for you, and then you fit underneath them. So they might be the entity that holds the insurances to apply on your behalf, and where you may not have the right structure. There are some not-for-profits out there that do that as well.
Yep. But
then I guess you're trying to align three things. One, that you're aligning with the organisation that will will be the applicant for you, and then also with the funder. So it does take some thought around developing the relationships, not just with the funder, but someone who might be the intermediary between that to achieve that as well.
Okay.
And when they do ask, if they do give you space to provide that additional documentation, I encourage you to do that too.
Okay.
Because again, the competitive process, there's going to be someone else that does or doesn't, or items that play to that too. So, for example, I don't know, even if you've got videos and things like that, so I've noticed some grants actually provide more flexibility in terms of how you might put that forward. So I tend to create I'll talk a bit about process as well for that too. So I've talked about talking and reviewing it, planning, what, how, when. You mentioned, Jules, that a lot of the people are just individuals.
Yes, most of us, I think, are individuals.
Yeah. So I guess
but many with companies behind us, I guess.
Yeah, I guess if it's going to be more than one person trying to write, or you're collaborating with one more, like with other entities to put an application, you just want to define who's doing what and when. So who's pulling what information, who's writing what component of it, work out how you're going to organise that system. So I have a folder with that grant in it, and then all the documents that I would need for that grant, like a project plan, the answers to the merit criteria, the login documents, the list of all the company details, because it's the same for each grant. So if you've built it for one, then it's really nice and easy to then transfer it across.
And for a lot of people that are also applying for awards, so they'll have a lot of that information at their fingertips as well.
Exactly, and it's a lot of the same information when you're talking about capabilities as well too. So I tend to have a document that just talks to capabilities to then pull out the right thing for that particular grant, which you would use for the awards as well, or you use on your website, or when you build a profile for LinkedIn, that you're able to then pull that same stuff again and again and again. And I guess the other part around that is you'll have a deadline for the grant, and the grant will usually have its own form to which to enter it online. I don't like to work in a form online. I've had it countless times fail, whether it's the internet connection or everyone's trying to upload things, writing their documentation at once. But also if it's about having someone edit and review it, it's really hard to see the changes that someone's made. So typically I set up a document with the key questions that are in it to then copy and paste in, and a few days before, so that if there is an issue with the submission, it gives that buffer to manage it, because the last thing you want to do is be 20 minutes before hitting send and then like it not going through, and trying to call up the funding entity and miss that deadline, because they are strict with the deadline. If you miss it, then you know all that preparation that you've done for the grant's gone to, you've missed it. So just taking that time to plan out what, when and how, by what date, block out the time, set up the folders, means that process is all a lot easier. Now, things that kind of help within that planning is having a look, if it's a program that's happened before, look at who's already been awarded the grants. It'll give you a good sense of whether your project idea fits. And I think that was
what Leanna was talking
about. When you were asking, can I have a chat to them? Absolutely have a chat to them and have a look at who's done what in the past. And I guess if you can start to see a pattern with the types of projects that they're doing, that gives you a good sense check of whether you're nailing it, but it also gives you the ability to have a look at how can you make your project stand out. what's going to make yours that little bit different that they're like, wow. To really differentiate yourself from that, because I guess, you know, the potential competitors, like nothing different from what you do in your business. You look at what other people do and you figure out what it is that you can do a bit differently and how you might tell that in your story as well. It also gives you a good idea of how much pockets of funding that they'll give per grant too. And by looking at the organisation and the size of that organisation of which they're giving that funding as well is quite helpful as well, to see how they kind of align it. And I guess there's been times where I've looked at a grant and thought, actually, that's not going to be a good fit looking at who they've awarded it to. Like, that's not where their focus point is. It helps understand that a little bit better. And if I'm not clear, it's worthwhile then, again, speaking to them to get an understanding of that.
Yeah.
When we're looking at research, the evidence and data to support your numbers around what your impacts might be or around your solution. So things like the ABS, the Australian Bureau of Statistics, like their statistics, but lots of industries or associations may have their own bodies of research that they've done to really define a problem. So you're actually able to reference those particular points back with that as well. So that when you're designing your project or what you're trying to do, you're like, well, we understand that this is how it's worked. And so what we're trying to do makes sense given that existing research. Someone's already done that research for us.
Yeah.
And so you can start to look at places like your libraries, state libraries or universities, to go and have a look at that too, or those different industry bodies.
Yep.
So with the writing part, definitely draft it offline because it makes it easier to edit. Start with your key points, like you would do with any writing, and then go through and
adding it out.
Thread it out. Get someone else that doesn't know anything about what you do, read it. Someone that doesn't know your organisation, because this is where we talk. You look at readers' logic. So quite often you get stuck in your own head of thinking, well, you forget that what people don't know and what little bit of snippet of information that you should help provide to tell that story as well. You want to be succinct.
Yep.
Write like it's a story as well, so that it's engaging. If you're reading 30 different applications, the one that reads like a beautiful story is the one that's going to capture your attention as well. So yeah, just not everyone knows what knows you, and that setting that up is akin to like what you would do for an award application as well.
Yeah.
Once you've completed the submission, make sure you've got that email. I like to take a screenshot of when I've hit submit for the times where I haven't got the email, to then be able to follow that up or have evidence that, hang on, I did submit at this time and this date. So they're just like little tips and bits.
I think a lot of them use Smarty grants now, don't they? And
yeah, a lot.
I see different email addresses I've signed in for different projects and things. But once you start to familiarise yourself with that format, that helps too.
Yeah. The federal government, like with the business type things, require you to register your business. So doing that, kind of get into the portal for the grant from like the day it opens to have a look, so that you can register yourself adequately. You can save like your application without having to submit it online. Some of them allow you to preview the form beforehand.
Yeah.
Which is all kind of helpful. So I guess this is just a kind of a summary of the things I've touched on throughout. It's about building relationships with the funders, with people that you're collaborating with, the people that you're supporting through for that particular grant. Being strategic, that what you're trying to do aligns with what the funders are trying to do, fits with what their goals are. That you're looking at that contribution, that ratio of contribution too, that it's a good mix. And then, you know, that it's reasonable. Like, is what you're saying you're going to do all achievable? Does it marry up? Am I trying to bite off more than I can chew? And I think that's really kind of important, because when you do get awarded the grant, and you put in the you get your grant agreement, that you're signing a legal agreement that says you're going to deliver certain things by a certain time. So you want to know that you can do that without having to go back and try and renegotiate around those milestones or about the funding and the shortfall. So ensure that, like, when you're looking at your budget, I guess for timing, like how long it's going to take me something, if you've worked out whether something is a day work, that you've got enough buffer in there to compensate for those for where things might fall behind, or where, I guess, you know, in the last 2 years the cost of living is changed, so that means that what you may have put forward in one budget might have, you know, gone up a bit, that you've got a bit of room to deal with that too. When you go back and look at that application that you've submitted, I pull up the grant guidelines next to me and look at that merit criteria and check that, have I answered their question? If I have to go and tick the box, can I tick the box of each of the things that they've asked me for? And if I can do that, then that's great. And then the last part is being able to demonstrate that, you know, that positive economic impact or others. Demonstrating your expertise, that you know how to, whilst there might be risk, that you can manage the risk. And I guess you understand the environment that you're in. So what might be great in one round, 1 year, because things have changed, because of whether any government's come in, or, you know, there's been a disaster of some like, sometimes like COVID or bushfires or the like. They're like, it's kind of understanding that as well in context and putting it there. I can't emphasize this more than enough, and it's the people that I see get grants have really thought about a way to get stuck in people's head. And so, you know, I think Kylie know.
What do you mean by
get out of
that?
their head, they'll keep on coming back.
What do you mean about getting stuck in their head? Just giving them a punchy
something punchy, something
application,
like,
so that that they don't forget it.
What's going to make you really memorable? And they'll ask for a project title, and they'll ask for a project description. So if you can get that right at the front. So whilst I don't know, sometimes the project might sound mundane, but maybe it's the impact that you're making is what makes it really kind of interesting. And so, like, Jules, I guess from your experience in PR, like if you want media to get your attention, it's having that, like that, you know, what's that? Or
that catchy, clickbaity kind of headline.
Yeah, like what's gonna resonate, what's gonna stick with them as well.
Sure.
So, so, all right. Once you've submitted, you play the waiting game, and I guess I've seen a lot of the guidelines will stipulate the timeline for which they'll go and assess and then notify people. And it's been a long time where I've actually seen a grant funder follow that timeline, because a lot of people are applying for that, for the applications. And so they've got lots to go through. But if you don't hear back within that timeline, give them a call.
Yeah.
Find out where it's up to. And you can apply for more than one grant. What you're doing within your project might fit with another funder.
Yeah.
Recycle, reuse. You've done this body of work to collate and pull it all together. You might have to rethink some of the nuances so that it better aligns with the criteria of what that fund is trying to do. Or you may need to just rethink the scope. So you might have a massive project, but actually the local council is giving a smaller pocket of funds. I can do this part of my task or this amount with it to then help me further that along. And I do get people saying, oh, what if I win both grants? I'm like, well, that's great. Deal with that problem at the point that it becomes a problem, because then you can negotiate that around. The one thing to keep in mind, though, is that most grants will say you cannot spend the money before you've received it, or you can't have started that project beforehand.
Yeah.
And I guess when you're thinking about that and what you're submitting, that it can't be for something that you want in the next month to do. We're thinking like 6 months ahead, a year ahead, 2 to 3 years ahead. Not for projects that you want to get the ball rolling, unless you can break it down to like do that first part.
Yep.
With everything that you collected there in terms of your capability, it's almost like doing a business CV, so to speak, right? And so if you've got this business CV that you've drawn up, like with these capabilities, that means that you've updated it. So use that to update what you've got on your website, on your LinkedIn profile. It's a useful exercise to go through and do, so you can update all that type of material. And then the last part in that is, well, if you've done that body of work to apply for that grant funding, maybe there's someone else that would invest in that isn't a grant. So you could pitch it to someone else as well. What happens next? Let's just say we win it. We've got the funding in. They'll give you an agreement, review it, make sure that the milestones are what you said that they're going to be in. Double check, does that still stick? Does that still work? Check when they're going to give you that funding. Some grants will give you a lump sum to kickstart, others don't. So you may want to think about that in terms of your project too, whether you need a bit of that cash up front to get the ball rolling. And then they'll list out the obligations, and some of those would be you've got to keep records, so all the transactions that you make, or whether that's timesheets to support that, or invoices allocated towards that. And so when you've you've got that grant folder that you've set up, you'd be throwing in all that information across there. If you've got, does anyone use accounting software within their business? Yeah. So whether it's easy enough to set up another an account that deals with that project for the grant, so you can easily track it with your transactions going through, so that you can do that quick export of the data to then provide back as well. And there may be reporting obligations as well. So whether you have to give them a report based on what you've done, a report on those milestones. In fact, you may have articulated a particular deliverable, and at the very end, you want to fully equip. Now, I think that's really important, that you do those things in terms of organisations where you want to be going back to them for more funding or applying for more grant funding, especially with councils. So if you didn't quit your last grant, or you didn't wrap it all up, they're definitely not going to give you funding for your next lot. And because you've won it, publicize it. Like, that's a win. That's something that your organisation has done that funders have said, this is really great. And so I guess it's like a second entity that's saying, yeah, we believe in this. So it's definitely an opportunity to publicise what you're doing, and get it back into your marketing. Okay, so on the flip side, you don't get it, and that is an opportunity to learn what you could do better. Give them a call, get feedback, understand what didn't line up, what they may have seen it as an issue. And actually happens to be one of my favourite questions to tell people when they're going for a job interview, to say, well, what do you see as my capability gap? What did you see as the gap there as well? Because then it gives you that opportunity to then improve on it, or think about changing the tact for it as well. And where you might have partners or collaborators or a team that have helped you, or someone that's reviewed the doc for you, let them know like how you went. They'd like to know. And then work out what you're going to do next. Use that same stuff, going back to that recycle, reuse. Where else can you use it? What else is coming up that you could apply for? Or again, look at what other ways could you get this funded? Has anyone done any like Kickstarter campaigns or GoFundMe campaigns or anything like that?
Not me.
So I guess the thing is, if you've done up a project as well, then you're like, well, there are those other platforms that trying to get amounts of funding pulled together. So going back to the start, you've got a project, there's more than one way to fund it. Grant funding is an opportunity to do that. You pull together a project plan and an application all to do that. You can use it in lots of different other places too.
Do you also do consultation on how to do like Kickstarters or, crowdfunders?
I haven't had immediate experience with them. I've looked at them, the different platforms that are there, and I guess things to be aware of with some of those platforms is they may require you to reach your target funding in order to get the funding.
Yeah.
Or so you don't get it all. And so with something like that, where you're crowdsourcing for that investment, it's the marketing campaign that sits behind it that's just as important. Because and then that's where it's a bit different, I guess. So whilst you might have like all your stuff that you've developed, it's actually, how do I get more eyeballs on this? What's going to get me in front of people to put forward that bit of funding? So that kind of works better for I guess for products. I think I've seen people use it for research. But I think it's better tiered for product-based items as well. I know a couple of people that have applied, so I can flick your name later, Leanna, as well. Yeah, about people's successes with that.
Right. Why don't you tell everybody what your offer is? Because they need to know that they can access you if they need help. So,
Jules, I'm going to share my screen again then, shall I?
Sure. Yeah, why not?
So I had to think, like, it's about what services I could provide to She's the Boss. So I've come up with these packages based on, well, this is the grant listing I'm going through at the moment, that I'll flick to you guys after and have a copy of that. But thinking about what I could provide. So this is packages of work designed especially for She's the Boss members. And so the first is being a grant funding strategy consultation. So I sit with you and work out what your grant funding strategies, do a couple of workshops, collect all your information based on what you want to do around the projects that you're trying to achieve and the types of funding for, like the types of resources that you need to achieve it, to then provide you with a report that looks at your business, a snapshot, those goals, identifying the actual grant. So I've gone in and looked at the grant eligibility criteria for you and mapped it against your projects to know whether it's a good fit or not, and then recommend an action plan of how to go about and who to approach. And then there's a link to that. The other one, which is doing a review of your grant application. So going back to the whole point of getting other people to review what you've written, someone who doesn't know you, this is an opportunity to do that. Really small workshop with 4 people for about for a full day. Bring along your submission that you've prepared, and we'll go through it step by step. Make sure that you've ticked the box against their guidelines, that you're telling a great story, and what the gaps might be to improve upon that. And so I've popped up some dates to run over the year. It's just a matter of, I guess, whether it aligns with some of the deadlines that come up with it.
Yep.
The other thing being is everything starts with a project. So developing a project plan that's got its budgets and milestones across it. And so I've tried to tier that based on what your project size might be as well, because effectively is your project.
Do you want to move the slide up a bit so we can see what the different project amounts are for the amounts? Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, and will you post that or something like that into the group as well, Athena?
Yeah. What's best? Shall I email it through to you?
Yeah, email me the PDF, because I'll send that out to everyone who's attended and to all the members. And you might also want to do a little post in the Facebook group as well.
Okay.
And I will share it. Does anyone have any more questions that they'd like to ask Athena? I think.
Yeah. So can I just recap again? Because I guess, Chantal, with what you were talking about in terms of going to philanthropy, to other organisations, yeah, do a project brief about what you want to do and what you want to achieve and the impact it's going to make, and ask for funding. Nothing more than a page, really high level, to start those conversations, because they'll either point you to those grants they've already got or go, oh, hang on, oh, maybe it can fit here. But yeah, it's developing those relationships with organisations where you want to be. And then they'll figure out that in that sustainable development goals was, you know, where people are trying to align themselves with. So are people, do you know where to go to find that information? No? All right, that'll be an extra thing I'll flick through, but it's aligning yourself to international goals in terms of changing what the world looks like to be a better place, and starting to speak that language, because you're starting to see more of the criteria that comes in that not-for-profit sector speaks to that. You can see it starting to align with that.